What's up, everybody? My name is Jacob Hardison, and today I'm going to give you 5 tips to help prevent overheating. Welcome back, everybody, to, of course, the lovely Adrenaline RC YouTube channel, where today I'm going to give you 5 tips on how to prevent your electric RC car from overheating. As we all know, here in the States, we are in the lovely summer season, which means it is hot out. And if it's hot out, that means your car has more potential for overheating. And we don't want that, because nobody wants to walk off the driver's stand sad and depressed because they were about to win a race, or maybe they were going to get on the podium and then their car hit thermal cutoff. And that's no fun. We don't want that. We want to finish our races, we want to finish strong, and we want to be winners. So today, I'm going to go over how to help you do that and to prevent your overheating. Now, this isn't something that's necessarily going to be specific to racing. This is, some of these are going to be useful for anybody and everybody playing with their toy cars. But I'm going to go over our 5 tips, which I have here in front of me. I don't have a particular order of most important to least important, because they're all important and all good things to look at. But I do, of course, have an order that I'm going to work through it. I'm going to work from this side here to this side. But it'll be important to keep an eye on all of them. This is going to be something that can be super duper useful in any type of situation. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So tip number 1 here is going to be making sure you have the proper diff fluid. Now, the diff fluid that I'm referring to specifically, or most specifically, is going to be our center diff. Or if you're on a 10-scale car, some 10-scale cars have slippers. I don't think any 8-scale cars have slippers, but this could work for you as well. If your diff oil is too light or your slipper clutch is too loose, something that could be happening is your motor is revving up high in the RPM range. It wants to go. It is going, but none of the other stuff is going because there's too much slip. So if you're noticing that you're hitting the throttle and the car's just not really doing a whole lot, you're probably just overworking the motor, letting it slip. The diff is going to be overheating. And like I said, you're going to be spending a lot of time making a lot of motor noise and motor RPMs without actually moving. Now, the diff oil recommendation is going to be different for every single car and every single track. Same thing with our slipper clutches. It is going to be a track-to-track thing. So I don't have a specific, oh, do this, that, or the other. It is something that you'll have to test on your own. But it is something that's going to be very, very useful. If you're getting too much slip, you're going to cause too much heat, you're going to have potential to hit that thermal, and more than likely, you're just not going to be able to really move around the track super duper efficiently. Something that you can also partially use as a reference for this is going to be, let's say you put brand new diff oil in the center, or you put brand new pads on your slipper clutch. When you go and drive, let's say 2-3 packs, you come back in, you open that diff up, or you check those pads and they look very burnt, or in the case of diff oil, smell very burnt. If you can't see it for whatever reason, that is going to be an indication that your oil is too light, you're bleeding too much power, and you're just going to overwork that motor. So tip number 1 is to make sure you have the proper diff fluid or slipper clutch tension at the center of your vehicle. Tip number 2 is going to be to check your gearing. Your gearing can play a major factor into what the motor temperatures are. As you go higher in your pinion gear, you're typically going to make the motor hotter. And if you go lower in pinion gear, you're usually going to make it cooler. With these electric motors, a rule of thumb basically is that you don't want to go over 180 degrees. That is kind of the limit. If you do it once or twice, it isn't going to necessarily cause ultra long lasting damage. It's not healthy by any means, but it's not something that is going to kill the motor. But if you start doing that over and over and over again, then you start damaging stuff inside the motor. You lose power, you lose torque, and then your motor, of course, is not as efficient. A way that I like to test my gearing out, especially if I know that I'm using something that is fairly aggressive, and this is going to be a really good tip for those of you that are doing stock racing, is usually I'll go out and I'll recommend to drive the track for 5 minutes. Generally, the car isn't going to overheat in 5 minutes unless you are just super duper far off on your gearing. So that is why I like to use that as my baseline. But what you can do is go do that 5 minutes, pull off the track, and then as quickly as you can, safely of course, you don't want to be falling down the stairs, but as quickly as you can, or if you have a buddy, you want to get to your car, pull the body off, and temp your motor. That is going to be a good way of knowing whether you're overgeared or not, because if your motor is right on the edge of that 180 degrees, you probably are going to want to gear down a little bit, because most 8th scale races are going to be 8 to 10 minutes, and even stock races are usually going to be 5 to 6 minutes. So for stock, if you're at that limit and you're trying to just maximize the car for that 5 to 6 minutes, then you're probably okay. But again, if you're right on that limit, then you're probably going to want to gear down a little bit compared to where you are. But with the 8th scale stuff, like I said, you're usually going to run at most an 8 to 10 minute main. So if your car is getting close to overheating already at the 5-minute mark, then you're going to want to adjust that. And the most common way to do that is to go down on your pinion gear. So let's say you have a 17 tooth pinion gear on your 8th scale car, then you could go down to a 16 or 15. Dropping a single tooth isn't going to be a super dramatic difference, but it might be just enough to where you can still get the power bands you want while also still having the longevity without overheating. So tip number 2 is going to be to make sure you have the right gearing, so that way you're not overheating your engine. Tip number 3 here is going to be venting your body in some fashion. Now this will go slightly hand in hand with our number 4, but we'll just talk about the holes for the moment. Basically, by adding holes into your body in some fashion in crucial areas can, of course, increase airflow. And airflow usually means that that is going to keep your temperatures cooler. So a good area that you can do, for example, on an 8th scale body, and I'll get a close-up of this, is you can put holes kind of right in these front panels here on either side, and that is going to, of course, help to get airflow, which means you're going to keep everything cooler. Traditionally, this is something that you'll probably mostly do on the motor side of the body. It isn't necessarily something that you're going to need to do on both sides, unless, of course, your speed control is on the other side, and that is getting hot as well. But it is something that, typically your motor is going to be the thing that overheats before anything else. So adding some body holes to allow that airflow to come through is going to be very, very useful. And to why this goes hand in hand with the next one is I'm going to use my 10th scale stock body here for when I was racing some 13.5, and I've got some vent holes on the very top here. Again, I'll get a close-up of this, and these vent holes aren't necessarily as much for the airflow through and more for if I have a fan mounted on the car. Those holes are going to allow my fan to actually be able to suck some air through. If the fan is just sitting up against a solid wall of body, basically, there's no airflow, you're not actually moving anything, so then you're just kind of circulating this hot air, and if anything, you might even be creating hot air because, well, now the fan can't work efficiently. So it's going to be very important to make sure that your fans can work, so you can use the vent holes to help to do that. So tip number 3, I think is what I'm on, is going to be body holes, whether it be to add airflow through the car as I smack my car, or it is a useful tool to help the fans be able to get efficient air into it and cool down. Tip number 4 here, which I guess I kind of gave a bit of a sneak peek to, is going to be fans. Fans are going to be very, very important, and it's something that I recommend to everybody. That way you can just immediately cool the motor down without necessarily needing to do a ton of other things, because airflow, like I said with the body holes, is going to allow things to stay cooler. So using an example here right in front of me, as my stand decides to stick to my car for some reason, I do have a fan mounted directly onto the motor, and that is going to allow airflow to hit the motor and keep it cooler. Now, something that is going to be important here is if you have the fan set up to where it is just blowing on the end bell, yes, that works, but it's not really super efficient because the end bell is the very end of the motor, hence the name end bell. So if you're just cooling that off, you're still allowing a ton of heat to build in the front portions and the center portion of your motor. What you'll see a lot in obviously my B4 here, and also in some 10 scale racing. The majority of fans are going to be mounted on either the top of the motor to where it's hitting the center of it, or in this case, it's going to be mounted on the side, but somewhere to where the airflow can most efficiently hit the largest portion of your motor. That way it cools the largest portion and keeps your temperatures nice and low. Another thing that can be useful for this is in stock racing, and I wish I had a photo of my car before I sold it, but in stock racing, something that you can see very commonly is, in this case, I have my fan wired to my receiver. That way it's just regulated at that voltage. But these fans are typically rated at higher voltage than what the BEC will put out. So what I would do is I would take my fan and I would actually solder it directly to the speed control. That's what it was. I would solder it onto the bullets. That way, when I plugged it into my battery, it immediately turned on and ran at whatever voltage that battery was. Now, this isn't something that you're gonna do in 8th scale necessarily, because with 8th scale, usually there's other ways to mitigate the heat, and with 13.5 stuff or 17.5, you're usually trying to get as much out of it as possible, which is why those overheat. Plus the 8th scale stuff, traditionally, the fans aren't quite ready to go that high in voltage, so you'll just use the receiver. But if you are running a stock buggy, something you can do, wire your fan straight to your battery. Obviously, you'll have to remember that when you plug in your battery, of which you'll hear the fan, so you'll know to make sure you unplug it. But that is a very useful tip to help getting maximum cooling. So tip number 4 is going to be throw a fan in some fashion on your car. If possible, you want to make sure that it is cooling the majority of the can, not just the end bell, because the end bell isn't going to do a whole lot for you. Tip number 5 is going to be to use your program box to check your ESC settings. Now, in your program box, you can check stuff like data logs to see what the temperatures in theory are. I will say I take that a little bit with a grain of salt. I personally prefer to use a temp gun to get those measurements, but that is not what we're talking about at the moment. We are talking about all of the different settings that affect the entirety of the power band of how the car delivers the power on the track. As you adjust a lot of the things in here, whether it be your frequencies or your timing, those are going to affect the load that is put through the motor, which is going to affect the temperature. Anything that adds load to the motor is going to make it run hotter. So something like turbo and boost is going to be very important to keep an eye on, because if you start adding a lot of that, you can potentially start adding a lot of heat. A very useful tool to help out with kind of where those numbers should be is, regardless of what speed control you have, whether it's Coyote, Hobbywing, Tekin, there is most likely some pro driver in the world that has posted a baseline setup sheet of some sort to give you some baseline parameters. So what you can do is you can use that kind of as a reference of being able to know how far out of that window you are. Let's say you're at 20 degrees of turbo and the sheets, or the majority of sheets, are reading that they will run 5 degrees. Well, that tells you that you might be a bit far out of the operating window for driving around the track, and of course that is going to add heat to your car. So it's gonna be very important to make sure that as you're adjusting your speed control settings, you're not getting super far out of the working window, so that way you don't have any heat issues. So this is gonna be a very useful tool to be able to make sure that everything is happy, hunky-dory, and functioning well for you at the track so you can be successful. So with that, that does give you our 5 tips to be able to help prevent some overheating at the track. I hope that this, of course, has been helpful for you. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, definitely leave those down below. Or if you have any requests for future videos, you can also leave those down below. I hope, like I said, this has been helpful, and we will see you guys next week for an all-new video.